My name is Margaret Fletcher, and the day my daughter-in-law told me to leave my own house was the day I realized silence could be louder than shouting. She stood in my kitchen, arms crossed, eyes cold. "You're useless," she said. "You just sit here and take up space." My son, Daniel, stood behind her, pretending to fix the curtain rod, pretending not to hear. The room smelled like burned toast and anger. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled and said, "Starting tomorrow, you won't see me again." That moment, those 10 words were the quietest kind of revenge I'd ever imagined. People assume that when you get old, you stop seeing things, but you see more. You just stop talking about them. I had noticed for months that Crystal, my daughter-in-law, had started running the house as if it were hers. She rearranged furniture, took down the old photos of my late husband, even replaced my curtains without asking. At first, I told myself it was harmless. Young people liked modern things. But then she began talking about our mortgage, our bills, our property. The word "our" never included me. When Daniel and Crystal moved in, I was lonely. My husband, Harold, had been gone for 5 years. The house in Bloomington, Indiana, felt too quiet. Daniel had just lost his job at the auto parts plant, and they needed a place to stay for a few months. I thought it was a blessing. I cooked, cleaned, and gave them the master bedroom. I told myself I was helping my son rebuild his life. What I didn't know was that Crystal had no intention of leaving. It started small, Crystal criticizing how I folded laundry or sighing loudly when I forgot to turn off the porch light. Then came the comments about how hard it is to take care of an elderly person. I was 62, not 80. I still worked part-time at the library and paid half the grocery bills. But in her eyes, I had become a burden. One morning, I overheard her on the phone. She thought I was outside, but I was standing just beyond the hall. "She's too stubborn to move to assisted living," Crystal said. "Once she's gone, we can finally fix this place up. Once she's gone." That phrase hit me like a cold wind. It wasn't just about the house. It was about erasing me. The next day, during breakfast, Crystal asked if I could find somewhere else to stay for a while. She smiled sweetly when she said it, like she was offering me a vacation. I stared at my coffee, then at Daniel. "You think I'm useless too?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just muttered, "Let's not make this a big deal, Mom." That's when I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, clarity. The kind you only get after decades of being polite. I looked at them both, then said, "Starting tomorrow, you won't see me again." That night, I opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were memories, wedding photos, my husband's letters from when he was in the Army, and most importantly, the house deed. I had kept it tucked in a manila folder, still under my name, Margaret Fletcher. Not Daniel, not Crystal. Mine. I sat there tracing the embossed county seal with my thumb. Harold and I had worked 20 years to pay off that mortgage. He used to say, "This house will always keep you safe, Maggie." And somehow, even now, it felt like he was watching from somewhere, reminding me, don't let anyone take what we built. The next morning, I called Mr. Bennett, my old lawyer. He'd helped Harold draw up the will. "I need to make some updates," I said. He didn't ask why, he just told me to come by his office. Before leaving, I packed a single suitcase, my clothes, some jewelry, and Harold's photo. I didn't tell Daniel or Crystal. I just left a note on the kitchen counter. "Be kind to each other, I'll be fine." Then I locked the front door from the outside and drove away in my old Buick. I rented a small room at a senior apartment complex on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, just quiet with a shared garden and neighbors who said good morning. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully. A few days later, Mr. Bennett helped me create a living trust. "You can keep full control of the property," he explained, "and they can't make a single move without your consent." He smiled gently. "You're doing the right thing, Margaret." When I left his office, I felt lighter. I hadn't yelled, slammed doors, or cursed. I had simply done what Crystal told me I left. That weekend, I drove past my old house, Crystal's car was parked in the driveway and Daniel was mowing the lawn. I watched for a moment from across the street. The curtains were new, the porch light was off, but the place looked empty. Not because I wasn't inside, but because love wasn't. I didn't hate them. I just felt sorry for them. Because they thought getting rid of me meant freedom. They didn't realize that everything standing behind those walls still belonged to me. They had pushed me out, but they didn't know yet they were the ones being pushed out. The following morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of my new apartment. It was quieter here. No clattering dishes, no television blaring in the background, no voices whispering behind closed doors. I made coffee in a small percolator I'd bought secondhand, sat by the window, and let the warmth of the mug sink into my palms. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. After breakfast, I drove to the grocery store. On the way, I passed the old post office, the church Harold and I used to attend, and the park where Daniel had learned to ride a bike. Everything looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. It's strange how the world doesn't change even when your life does. When I got home, I called the county office to confirm what Mr. Bennett had told me the house title was secure under my living trust. No one could sell rent or refinance it without my approval. My lawyer had also suggested freezing the property tax account temporarily, just to ensure no unauthorized payments were made. This will make them notice, he'd said. That phrase made me smile. Make them notice. 2 weeks passed before Daniel called. When I saw his name flash on the phone, I almost didn't answer. But old habits die hard. Mom, he said, his voice hesitant. Crystal and I were wondering when you're coming back. I'm not, I replied simply. I'm comfortable here. He hesitated. We just thought maybe. You could help with the property taxes this month. They came due sooner than expected. I could almost hear Crystal's voice in the background, sharp and impatient. I'm sorry, Daniel, I said softly. That house isn't your responsibility anymore, nor is it mine. It belongs to the trust now. He didn't understand at first. The trust. Yes, I said. It means I take care of the property and I decide who lives there. There was a long pause. Then he mumbled something about calling me later and hung up. I sat there for a long time staring at the phone. I wasn't proud or smug, just sad. A mother never wants to outsmart her child. She just wants peace. That evening, I walked to the community garden behind the apartments. The air smelled of cut grass and tomato vines. A neighbor named Linda waved me over. She was around my age with a kind smile and rough gardener's hands. You're the new lady in 3B, right? Margaret, she asked. Yes, I said. Margaret Fletcher. She handed me a small basket of green beans. You look like someone who could use a friend. Over the next few days, I found a rhythm morning walks, library volunteer work potluck dinners at the senior center. It was simple, but it filled me in ways that house hadn't in years. Every night I'd sit on my porch and watch the sunset the same way I used to back home. Sometimes I wondered if Daniel ever looked at the same sky. One afternoon, Mr. Bennett called. Margaret, he said, I thought you should know your son's wife tried to access the property records. She was asking about refinancing. I sighed. Of course she did. He chuckled softly. Don't worry. She can't do a thing without your signature. But if you'd like, I can have a notice sent just to make things official. Yes, I said. Do that. But make sure it sounds polite. Polite? He asked. Yes, I said. The kind of polite that keeps people up at night. A week later, Crystal called me herself. I don't know what game you're playing, Margaret, she said, her voice like ice. No game, I replied, just paperwork. You can't leave us hanging like this. The bills are your responsibility now, I interrupted. You wanted the house, now you have it. She went silent for a moment, then snapped, You'll regret this. I smiled. I already did. That's why I left. When I hung up, I felt something inside me settle. For years, I had lived in that house as if I owed everyone something. I had cooked, cleaned, paid bills, and kept quiet. But all that time, I'd forgotten the simple truth Harold once told me. Respect isn't given because you're needed. It's given because you've earned it. A few days later, a letter from the bank arrived addressed to the estate of Margaret Fletcher. I took it to Mr. Bennett, who explained that Crystal had tried to claim I'd moved into assisted living permanently and that the house should be transferred to Daniel for caretaking purposes. He looked amused as he slid the document across his desk. "I assume you'd like me to respond?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Kindly remind them that I'm very much alive and still capable of signing my own checks." When I left his office, I stopped by the town square cafe. I hadn't been there since Harold passed. The waitress, Jenny, recognized me. "Margaret, haven't seen you in ages." "How's your family?" I paused before answering. "Learning," I said. "They're learning." That night, I sat on the porch of my little apartment, wrapped in a blanket sipping tea. The crickets were singing, and the world felt small but safe. Somewhere across town, my old house stood still under the same Indiana moon. They thought they had won when they told me to leave. They thought they'd gotten rid of a burden. But the truth was simple. I had taken the weight with me and left them with the emptiness they'd created. I didn't need revenge in flames or shouts. Mine came quietly on paper, signed in blue ink, and sealed with peace. It took another month before the first cracks began to show. Mr. Bennett had advised me to stay calm and let time do the work, and that's exactly what I did. From my small apartment, I could watch everything unfold like a television drama I'd already seen before. It started with a notice. The county office sent Daniel and Crystal a letter reminding them that property taxes were overdue and that the listed account holder, me, had frozen all automatic payments. I knew that letter would hit them hard. The house wasn't cheap to maintain. Heating, water insurance, it all added up fast, especially when neither of them had steady work. A week later, Daniel called again. "Mom, they're saying the taxes weren't paid," he said. "You always handled that stuff. Can you just unfreeze it?" "I can't," I said. "The trust handles all of that now." "But you are the trust," he said, frustrated. "Exactly," I replied. "And the trust says the house needs responsible occupants." He didn't respond right away. I could hear Crystal whispering something sharp in the background. Then he said, "You're really going to make things hard for us, aren't you?" I took a slow breath. "Daniel, you and Crystal made things hard for me first." I just finally stopped pretending it was fine. After that call, there was silence for 2 weeks. I spent my time volunteering at the library, helping the senior group with a reading program, and chatting with Linda over iced tea. Every now and then, I'd drive by my old neighborhood not to spy, but to remember. The maple tree Harold had planted was turning orange. The porch light was still off the way Crystal liked it, but the house no longer looked like mine. It looked like a photograph left in the sun, too long, faded, missing its warmth. Then one afternoon, I received a message from Mr. Bennett. "They've filed for a loan against the house," he said, his voice calm but firm. "They're trying to refinance." I smiled a little. "They won't get far." "They won't," he agreed, "but it might be time to send a formal notice." 2 days later, a certified envelope arrived at their mailbox on official stationery. It was a polite but firm statement. The house was under legal trust, and any attempt to alter its financial status without authorization would result in eviction. That evening, my phone rang again. This time, Crystal didn't bother with pleasantries. "You witch," she hissed. "You think you can just disappear and control everything from afar?" I don't think I said evenly. "I know." "You left us with bills. No credit." "Nothing," I interrupted softly. Crystal, I didn't leave you with nothing. I left you with each other. That's what you wanted, wasn't it? She hung up before I finished. Later that week, I received a call from a friend who lived down the street from my old place. Margaret, she said, is everything all right with your son? I saw some moving boxes outside your house. Oh, I asked, trying not to sound too curious. Yes, looks like they're clearing things out. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence for a while. The truth was, I wasn't surprised. I knew the eviction notice had forced them to face reality. Without my name, without my credit, that house was nothing more than a roof they couldn't afford. But something in me ached, not because I wanted the house back, but because I wished Daniel had learned differently. I wanted him to understand that kindness isn't weakness. I had spent years teaching him to stand on his own, and now, watching him stumble, it broke my heart. A few nights later, I found an old photo of Daniel when he was 10 years old, holding a baseball glove, grinning like he had just caught the winning ball. Harold stood beside him, proud and patient. I ran my fingers over that picture until tears blurred my vision. I hope you find your way, son, I whispered, even if it's without me. By the end of the month, the official confirmation arrived. Daniel and Crystal had vacated the property. Mr. Bennett called me into his office to sign a few final papers. Would you like to move back in? He asked. I shook my head. No, not yet. Maybe someday. For now, I just want to make sure it's safe. He nodded. Then I'll handle maintenance and security for you. It's still yours, Margaret, completely. Driving home that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace mixed with sorrow. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't fought, but somehow justice had arrived all the same. That night, Linda and I sat outside watching the sunset. She passed me a cup of lemonade. You've been quiet lately, she said. Just thinking, I replied. About your son, I nodded. About how sometimes the hardest part of love is letting someone fall so they can learn to stand. She smiled gently. You sound like someone who's finally sleeping well. I am, I said. And it's not because everything's perfect, it's because I stopped waiting for it to be. Inside, I placed the photo of Harold and Daniel on my nightstand. The house might have lost its family for a while, but maybe one day it would find it again, just in a different form. For now, I was home, even if the walls were different. Mr. Bennett once told me revenge doesn't always come from anger, Margaret. Sometimes it comes from preparation. I didn't fully understand what he meant until the day I walked into his office again, a folder tucked neatly under my arm. The air smelled like old books and polished oak. I want to make sure the house stays protected, I told him. Not just from Crystal, but from anyone who doesn't understand what it cost us to build it. He nodded, adjusted his glasses, and opened a new file. We can strengthen the trust, he said. That way even your son can't sell or rent it without meeting certain conditions. What kind of conditions, I asked. The kind that reflect your values, he said. So we spent an hour talking about what mattered to me: honesty, responsibility, compassion. In the end, we wrote it simply: the property shall not pass to any beneficiary who disrespects, neglects, or financially exploits the grantor. I stared at those words for a long time. They felt heavier than any punishment. They were a lesson carved in ink. When the paperwork was done, I left the office feeling oddly at peace. Outside, the autumn air carried a hint of wood smoke. Bloomington looked beautiful in October orange leaves piling along the sidewalks, the smell of cider drifting from the farmer's market. I stopped for coffee and watched young couples walking hand in hand. Once, that had been Daniel and Crystal. I wondered if they ever looked that happy anymore. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the county office confirming the updated trust. I placed it in my nightstand drawer beside Harold's photo. You'd be proud, I whispered. You always said the right kind of revenge is one that teaches. The following weekend, I drove by the old house again. The lawn was overgrown and a "For Rent" sign leaned crooked in the yard. They'd tried to rent it out even though they had no legal right to. The sight made me laugh quietly to myself. Still pretending to own what isn't theirs, I thought. When I got home, my phone was already buzzing. It was Daniel. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Mom, they said we can't rent the house. Some lawyer called and said we're violating the trust agreement." Crystal's furious. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said softly. "She said you did this on purpose." "I did it to protect what your father and I worked for," I said. "You can still come by. You can still be part of it, but not like this." There was a long pause, then he whispered, "Crystal wants to move out of state." "That might be good for both of you," I replied. "Sometimes distance teaches what comfort can't." After that, he didn't call for several weeks. I filled my days with small joys, helping kids at the library's reading program, baking cookies for the church fundraiser, tending to a small pot of daisies on my porch. Life was simple, quiet, and honest again. Then one evening, as I was finishing dinner, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there, his eyes tired and shoulders slumped. "Mom," he said, voice low. Crystal left. I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of tea I placed in front of him. She said she was done living like this, said I wasn't man enough to fix things. I wanted to say she wasn't wrong, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Sometimes the only thing broken is what we thought we needed to hold on to." He looked up, eyes glassy. "You really planned all of this, didn't you?" "No," I said. "I just stopped letting other people write my ending." For a long while, we sat in silence. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "But I also know you'll be better for it." The next day, I drove him back to the house. It was empty now. No curtains, no laughter, no arguments. Just the echo of what had been. The floors creaked under our feet as we walked through the living room. I could almost see Harold in his chair reading the newspaper and me in the kitchen, humming to an old country song. Daniel stood by the fireplace and said, "It feels different now." "It's because love used to live here," I told him. "Without it, it's just wood and walls." He nodded quietly, wiping his eyes. "What happens to it now?" "It'll stay in the family," I said. "One day when you're ready, you can take care of it again. But not until you've learned what home really means." That evening, I had Mr. Bennett come by to finalize the next step. We signed an agreement allowing Daniel to rent the house for a modest fee with clear conditions he'd maintain the property, pay utilities, and respect the trust. It wasn't punishment. It was a second chance. Before leaving, Mr. Bennett said, "You've handled this with Grace Margaret. Most people would have gone to war." I smiled faintly. Sometimes silence wins louder than shouting. Later that night, I sat on the porch of my little apartment and watched the stars blink over the dark Indiana sky. Somewhere across town, Daniel was back in that house, probably realizing what it had really cost to call it his. I didn't hate him. I didn't even hate Crystal. I just understood that not everyone who shares your home shares your heart. The world has a way of balancing itself slowly, quietly, but surely, and if you're patient long enough, truth always comes knocking. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Daniel again. This time, he called not out of frustration but from something that sounded a lot like humility. His voice was soft, hesitant, the kind of tone I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager asking to borrow the car keys. "Mom," he said, "I've been doing the repairs you mentioned. The house needed more work than I realized. The gutters were clogged and the water heater was leaking. I guess I didn't understand how much you took care of while we lived there." I smiled into the phone. Most people don't understand how much love it takes to keep a house standing until the roof starts to leak. He gave a small laugh. Yeah, you're right. Then there was silence, followed by a question that sounded more like an admission. Do you think Crystal was right about me? That I wasn't good enough? I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. No, Daniel. But I do think you forgot what good enough looks like. It's not about money or pride, it's about gratitude. You don't become small by saying thank you. You become small by forgetting how. He didn't answer right away, but I could hear him sniffle softly. I miss Dad, he said. I know, I replied. Me too. That evening, after we hung up, I found myself looking through old photo albums. There was Daniel at his high school graduation, me holding Harold's hand, our first family Christmas in that very house. I ran my fingers along the glossy surface of one photo, where Harold was hammering a nail into the porch railing, Daniel beside him pretending to help. Beneath it, Harold had written in his neat handwriting, "Teach him to build, and he'll always find his way back home." For the first time since all this began, I let myself cry, not out of sadness, but out of release. Sometimes peace doesn't come when things are fixed. It comes when you stop trying to fix what isn't yours anymore. The following weekend, Daniel came to visit. When I opened the door, I could see he'd been working hard. His hands were rough, his clothes stained with paint, and his eyes tired, but clearer than before. He held a paper bag and handed it to me. I brought your favorite, he said. Chicken salad from Maple Deli. I laughed. You remembered. We ate together at my small kitchen table, just like old times. He told me he'd started a new job at the local hardware store. It's not much, he said, but it feels good to be doing something. I nodded. You're rebuilding, Daniel. That's how we all start over, with small things done right. Then hesitantly, he asked, do you think I could move back into the house for real? Just me to take care of it properly this time. I looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were honest, his tone sincere. I think that's a good idea, I said finally. But you'll treat it differently now, won't you? He nodded. I will. I called Mr. Bennett that afternoon to draft the new rental agreement, modest rent monthly maintenance updates, and quarterly inspections. When I told him Daniel had changed, he smiled over the phone. People tend to when they realize what they almost lost, he said. The next morning, Daniel came by to pick up the keys. He looked around my little apartment, noticing the potted plants on the sill and the quiet order of the place. It's cozy here, he said. It's peaceful, I corrected. He nodded slowly. I get it now. When he left, I walked him out to the parking lot. The early November air was crisp, carrying the smell of leaves and faint chimney smoke. Before getting into his truck, he turned and said, Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. I almost did, I admitted, but your father wouldn't have wanted that. He smiled faintly and nodded. I'll make him proud. I'll make you proud too. As I watched him drive away, I felt the kind of quiet warmth that comes when the world finally starts to right itself. Revenge, if that's what people wanted to call it, had never been my goal. What I wanted was restoration, not of a house, but of a heart. The days that followed were peaceful. I continued volunteering, helping with a Thanksgiving food drive and writing Christmas cards for the residents. Every so often, Daniel would call to tell me about his progress, fixing the porch, painting the kitchen, planting winter pansies out front. I didn't need to visit to know he was doing well. I could hear it in his voice. One afternoon, Linda came over with 2 cups of coffee. You seem lighter lately, she said. I guess I am, I replied. For the first time in years, I'm not holding my breath waiting for peace to start. It's already here. That night, as I sat on my porch wrapped in Harold's old blanket, I looked up at the Indiana sky, a blanket of stars scattered over quiet rooftops. Somewhere across town, my son was learning how to be his own man again. Somewhere, a house that once echoed with anger was learning to breathe again, too. In the distance, a light flickered on in what used to be my living room. For a brief second, I could almost see Harold's silhouette in his old chair, smiling that proud, quiet smile he used to wear when things finally turned out right. And in that moment, I realized something simple but profound. Sometimes, revenge isn't about winning. It's about reminding the world what's worth keeping. The first snow of December fell light and quiet over Bloomington, painting the sidewalks white and softening the world. I woke early that morning to the sound of church bells from across the street and the faint hum of a plow clearing the road. My apartment smelled of cinnamon and coffee, my favorite scent of winter. I sat by the window, wrapped in Harold's blanket, and watched the flakes fall slowly onto the garden below. I had always loved this time of year, not for the holidays themselves, but for the stillness. Winter in Indiana makes people slow down, talk softer, think deeper. It's when the noise fades and truth becomes easier to hear. Daniel came by that afternoon, his truck covered in salt and slush. He stomped his boots at the door before coming in, carrying a small potted evergreen wrapped in red paper. "It's not much," he said sheepishly, "but I thought your porch could use a little Christmas." I smiled and took it from him. "It's perfect." He sat down at the kitchen table, rubbing his hands together to warm them. "The house is coming along," he said. "I fixed the furnace and sealed the windows. Mr. Bennett stopped by to check the paperwork. He said everything's in good shape." "That's good," I said. "It deserves care. That house held us through everything, storms, laughter, even silence." Daniel nodded, his eyes softening. "It feels different now, lighter somehow." "Because it's standing on truth," I said. And truth always changes the air in a house. He looked down at his coffee for a moment. "I think I finally understand what you did, Mom. You weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to wake me up." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "I never wanted to see you fall, Daniel. But sometimes the only way to see clearly is to lose the comfort of blindness." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You and your sayings." "They're not sayings," I said with a grin. "They're survival." We both laughed, then real easy laughter, the kind I hadn't heard from him in years. Before he left, he said, "I was thinking of inviting you to the house for Christmas dinner. Just us. Simple meal, nothing fancy." I hesitated for a moment. The thought of walking back into that house filled me with both warmth and ghosts, but his eyes held something new, sincerity. "All right," I said, "but only if you promise not to let the rolls burn like last time." He smiled. "No promises." When Christmas Eve came, I dressed in my green sweater and wool scarf and drove through quiet streets blanketed in snow. The house stood there, lights glowing from every window, smoke rising gently from the chimney. Daniel opened the door before I could knock. Inside, the smell of roasted chicken and cinnamon filled the air. "Wow," I said, stepping in. "You really did it up." He shrugged, smiling. "I figured the house deserved one more proper Christmas." We sat down to eat. The meal was simple, but perfect: roasted vegetables, homemade bread, and a pie he said he'd bought from the store, but claimed he made himself. I let him have that victory. After dinner, we sat in the living room. The fireplace crackled softly, and I could almost feel Harold's presence in the warmth. Daniel handed me a small box wrapped in plain paper. "It's not much," he said again, his old habit. Inside was a framed photo, the three of us taken years ago in this same room. Harold in his chair, Daniel sitting on the floor, me smiling behind them. But at the bottom of the frame, Daniel had added something in his handwriting. "Thank you for never giving up on me." My throat tightened. "You've grown, Daniel." He smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher." We spent the rest of the evening talking about old memories, the year the roof leaked during a storm, the time Harold tried to fix the washing machine and flooded the laundry room, Daniel's high school graduation party that ended with neighbors bringing pie at midnight. The past didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded us how far we'd come. As I got ready to leave, Daniel walked me to the porch. The snow had started falling again, soft and endless. The air was cold but gentle. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want you to know. I'm going to take care of it now. Not because I have to, but because I want to." I nodded. That's all I ever hoped for. Before I drove off, I looked back once. The porch light, the one Crystal always turned off, was glowing, warm and steady. When I returned to my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the photo frame in my lap. For a moment, I closed my eyes and pictured Harold smiling beside me. "You were right," I whispered. He found his way home. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I felt something close inside me, not a door shutting, but a circle completing itself. I had left my house months ago in silence, thinking I was walking away from everything I loved. But now I understood that sometimes stepping away is the only way to return whole. The house stood warm again, filled not with ownership or pride, but with forgiveness. Spring came slow to Indiana that year. The frost lifted in patches, and little by little, color returned to the world. The magnolia tree outside my apartment bloomed in pale pinks, and the air smelled faintly of rain and new beginnings. Daniel came by more often after that Christmas, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit and talk. He'd begun saving money, taking extra shifts at the hardware store, and even started volunteering at the community center. I could see it, the quiet pride of a man rebuilding himself. One Sunday afternoon, he brought over a basket of flowers. "For your porch," he said. "You always said flowers make a place feel like home." I smiled. They do. They remind us to grow even when we've been through the cold. We spent that afternoon replanting them together, petunias, daisies, and a stubborn fern that refused to stay upright. As we worked, Daniel told me that he'd run into one of Crystal's old friends. "She's living in Ohio now," he said. Apparently, Crystal remarried. I looked at him, unsure how to respond. He shrugged. "It doesn't bother me anymore. I think she taught me what kind of man I don't want to be." "That's the gift of hard lessons," I said softly. "They don't come wrapped in kindness, but they stay longer than the easy ones." When he left that day, I stood on my porch watching him drive away under the soft gold of a spring sunset. The world felt balanced again. Fragile, yes, but peaceful. A few days later, I received a call from Mr. Bennett. "Margaret, he said you've done something rare. You managed to keep your dignity, your family, and your peace all in one piece." I laughed gently. I didn't plan it that way. I just learned that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of a woman thinking. He chuckled. "Well, whatever it was, it worked. Daniel's paid every month on time. You've both honored that house." "That house," I repeated, smiling. "It's finally just what it was always meant to be, a home." That night, I took a drive out to see it. The porch light was on, glowing warmly. The flower beds were blooming, the shutters freshly painted white. Daniel had even repaired Harold's old rocking chair and placed it where it used to sit, facing the sunset. I parked across the street, turned off the engine, and just watched for a while. In the living room window, I saw Daniel walk past carrying a laundry basket. For a brief moment, he paused, looked out, and saw my car. He smiled, gave a little wave, and mouthed the words, "Thank you." I waved back, then started the engine again. Driving home, I thought about all that had happened. Months ago, I had been told I was useless, that I didn't belong in my own home. But here I was, stronger, freer, and surrounded by people who respected me, not because they had to, but because I had learned to respect myself first. It's strange how life works. Sometimes you lose everything you thought you needed just to realize what you already had. When I got home, I brewed a cup of tea and sat on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the magnolias. The air was still the kind of stillness that feels like a reward. I thought about Harold again, about all the years we'd built that house nail by nail, prayer by prayer. I wished he could have seen how it ended, not in shouting or bitterness, but in quiet understanding. Daniel called that night just before bed. "Mom," he said, "I wanted to tell you. I'm thinking about selling the truck and using the money to fix the back porch. It still creaks." I smiled into the phone. "Your father would be proud. He always said a man who fixes his porch is a man who's staying." Daniel laughed. "Maybe I finally am." Before hanging up, he added, softly, "I love you, Mom." I hesitated for a moment, my throat tightening. "I love you too, son." After the call, I stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street below. Somewhere between winter and spring, the pain that once lived in my chest had melted away, like the last patch of snow. What remained wasn't bitterness, it was gratitude. Gratitude for lessons learned the hard way, for the peace that follows truth, and for the second chances that time sometimes gives if we're patient enough. I took out my journal and wrote one final line for the day. Peace doesn't mean the storm never came. It means you learned how to plant flowers in the mud it left behind. The next morning I woke early, brewed coffee, and stepped outside to water the flowers Daniel had brought. The air smelled like rain again, and somewhere in the distance, a train horn blew, a reminder that life keeps moving always forward. I smiled and whispered to myself, "Starting tomorrow, you won't see me again," remembering those words that had once marked my quiet escape. But this time they meant something different. They weren't about leaving, they were about moving forward. I looked toward the horizon, golden with the promise of another day, and whispered, "Thank you, Harold. For the house, for the lessons, for the strength." Then for the first time since all of this began, I said out loud what my heart already knew: I'm finally home. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need its reminder that silence can heal, forgiveness can free, and walking away can sometimes be the strongest way to come home again. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of love betrayal and women who rise again.